Good evening, everyone. I'm Scott Anderson, and this is a talk about Gustav Klimt. You can see his dates, but we will come across those again in a moment. But this is one of his early 20th century pictures. But let's really start here. In 2006, one of the, I think it was a New York newspaper, possibly the New York Times, published the words, "A dazzling gold-flecked 1907 portrait by Gustav Klimt has been purchased for the Neue Gallery in Manhattan by the cosmetics magnate Ronald S. Lauder for princely sum of $135 million, which at that time, as it says, was the highest sum ever paid for a painting. This is the painting. You'll be quite familiar with it. It's a portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, but it's usually known as Adele Bloch-Bauer I, and it is one of the most famous paintings in the world. I've been to the Neue Gallery in Manhattan on several occasions, and I've seen this picture. And Ronald S. Lauder, I think probably for marketing reasons as much as anything else, get people in to see his gallery, calls it his New York Mona Lisa. And I think probably you can see it's a very impressive and imposing and very memorable picture. We'll get back to her in a little while, but let's have a look and see who painted this stunning piece of art. This is the artist, a picture of Gustav Klimt, 1862 to 1918. I suppose he's in his middle years here. He'll be 40s, something like that, I suppose, when this was taken. You can see a fairly smart gentleman when the picture was taken. He often did wear a suit and tie. He wore quite smart clothes, I think, on all occasions, other than when he was on holiday or he was in the studio painting. His is a story of a rise from rags, not quite to riches, but certainly to comfortable living. And it's quite an interesting life that he led. Artists often lead interesting lives, and Klimt was no different, I suppose, in that sense, but he certainly did get up to some antics. There are some modern artists that have as well. If you think about people like Peter Blake, he associated with people like the Beatles, for example, and the high and exciting days of the 1960s. And I remember when I was talking to one of his associates a few years ago now, we were at a place where dance was taking place, and it was only literally a few years ago. He told me the last time he danced, his partner was Marianne Faithfull. So artists, I suppose, at all periods in history, get up to some quite interesting things in their lives. However, let's get back to Klimt. Klimt was born in 1862. As you can see on the screens, it makes it easier for me to remember who they all were. The second of 7 children. His father was Ernst Klimt. His mother was Anna, originally Finster. And the two got together. They had, I think, basically a one-room flat for themselves and their 7 children, certainly when they started out. There were, as I say, 7 of them. 2 of them don't appear here, and that's because I don't think they survived to adulthood. One of them, a girl called Anna, certainly lived till she was 5 or 6. And then there was another one who subsequently, I think, died as well. But the oldest son was obviously Gustav Klimt. He had 2 brothers, Ernst and George, or Georg, and sisters Clara and Hermione, and we shall see or hear a little bit more about some of them on the way. His brothers, Ernst and George, were also artistic and creative. Ernst was a painter, like his older brother Gustav, and Georg was a goldsmith who also produced wonderful frames for quite a number of frames for Gustav Klimt's paintings. And we'll see one or two of those frames as we go along. But anyway, so that's the family. They were very poor. Ernst was an engraver. That's what he specialised in. And there was literally never any spare cash to go round. When he went to primary school, Gustav was, and when I just say the word Klimt, it usually just means Gustav Klimt. Klimt was a very attentive pupil. He learned quickly. He knew, I think, that he was fairly intelligent. The teachers soon realised he was. But above all, they realised that he was very good at artwork. He drew very, very well. And one of the teachers at the school suggested to his parents that possibly he should try and take the entrance examination for the Imperial Austrian Art and Industry School, or the School of Applied Arts, really, I suppose, of the Imperial Royal Museum of Austrian Art and Industry, as you can see below. You would think probably that they just sent Gustav off to work because any money coming in would have been good, but no, they bit the bullet and they sent him off to the examination. When he was in the exam room, I think the person sitting next to him was a young chap just a little bit older called Franz Match. And these two remained friends for a number of years, and they were both very important for each other's careers. Both of them passed the exam with flying colours. And so from 1876 through to about 78, 79, Klimt was studying at the School of Applied Arts. It wasn't a fine arts school per se. It dealt with everything, design and the applied arts, as well as drawing particularly. When they had taken, well, I was about to say that the following year as well, Ernst, also the young Klimt, the younger Klimt, Ernst, he took the exam, he also passed. So the two brothers and Franz Match formed a little triangle, as it were, and they were all of them very, very talented indeed. They took their examinations, the exams that would allow them to become art teachers or perhaps get a job for design in industry. But the rector of the school decided that it might be a good idea to offer them another alternative to the working world. He suggested that he would give them all a little bursary, each of the three of them, he'd give a little bursary, enough to keep them going, and sent them off to learn a lot more with a chap called Professor Laufberger, who also worked for the school. And he was also a designer, a decorative artist, and I suppose one would call him a fine artist as well. And for the next 3 years, the three young men studied under Laufberger. We don't hear much about Laufberger these days, but if you go and visit the museum today, it's known as the MAC. I won't go through the German for that one, but it's known as the MAC. It's very like our own Victoria and Albert Museum in London. If you go to the MAC, you can see on the outside this wonderful mosaic of the goddess Athena. Athena, of course, the goddess of wisdom, but also a sort of patron goddess of the arts. And in her hand, she holds a little victory. And this is a wonderful mosaic by Laufberger. Do notice that not only is she a warrior goddess, she has a spear, but her wisdom, of course, is shown by her association with the owl at her feet. Now, Laufberger was immediately struck by the ability of this little gang of three. And by 1879, when there was a big festival to celebrate the silver wedding of the Emperor of Austria and his Empress Elizabeth, it was Franz Joseph and Elizabeth, he decided that he could probably get good employment, I think, out of them. He would like them to help him with many of the designs, particularly for costumes and the floats for all the people who were going to take part in this wonderful procession to celebrate this silver wedding anniversary. They got on well together, they were very competent, and Laufberger started suggesting other things, and they gradually found themselves doing odd little bits and pieces for a whole range of other people. So Laufberger really very important for launching their careers. It's very traditional, so probably didn't have too much to do with the later life of Klimt and his revolutionary new art, such as the one you saw right at the beginning. But certainly he taught them all the important points: how to paint, how to design, how to compose a picture, and I suppose encouraged them to work together as well as a team. They learnt to draw amazingly well at the original school, but Laufberger taught them to paint, and because he was a fairly traditional artist who painted in the historicist style, that's exactly how he got the three young men to work. This is a painting of Francesca da Rimini and Paolo. You may know the story of Paolo and Francesca, an illicit love affair in Renaissance Italy. I won't go into it, but this is a typical sort of Victorian subject. And here we have a painting by Ernst Klimt. I thought it'd be nice to show you this because of, well, variety of reasons, but because Ernst Klimt was also very, very good. It wasn't just Gustav, Ernst could paint very well. The traditional historicist style that was prevalent in Vienna at the time was a very sort of naturalistic, almost photographic style. It wasn't expressionist, it wasn't impressionist, it was very much the sort of style that was quite commonplace in, say, England, for example, from the middle of the 19th century onwards, or even before. But people like William Powell Frith painted in this very tight, very tightly finished manner. So you can see every crease on the dress, you can see strands of individual hair, flower petals. It has a lot of influence, this style, from people like the English Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and also the other artists who were working in a sort of genre field in Britain at the time. But it became a fairly pan-European style, particularly for commercial artworks. And that's what these young men were training for, not to be outstanding, hugely known, world-renowned artists. They were being taught to be commercial artists, artists who could paint wall murals, artists who could paint a variety of objects, paint your furniture if you like, nice scenes on furniture, nice scenes on your walls. They weren't going out to be another Picasso or anything like that. But, well, they weren't quite content with this, as we will find out in the end. Just a little brief, bring you up to date and remind you when we are. We're now in the 1880s. The two Klimt brothers, Franz Match, have started collaborating on a variety of joint projects. Vienna at the time was very wealthy. They'd had a bit of a recession in the 1870s. They were coming out of that quite quickly. They'd knocked down the city walls that ran around central Vienna from the sort of medieval and post-medieval period. And they built, of course, the great ring, the road that goes round the outside of the main city. They built public buildings, large private buildings on both sides of this Ringstrasse. And there was a lot of work to do, decorating people's homes, particularly with murals, ceiling paintings, this sort of thing. And they soon found that they were becoming quite successful. So much so that in 1883 they opened up a joint studio. They didn't just meet on the job or socially, but they opened up a joint studio, and we see them founding their artist company, the Klimt brothers and Franz Mach artist company, or Künstlerkompanie in German. From 1883 onwards till 1892, they had a very successful time carrying out a whole load of projects. One of the things that Laufenberger seemed to do as well was to put them in touch with a pair of architects called Hermann Hellner and Ferdinand Fellner. Nice sort of alliteration there, who were theatre architects. Now, Vienna is, of course, the centre of a huge empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, taken into, you know, originally bits of Italy, Bulgaria, Romania, bits of Germany. That huge area was covered by this empire. It was all to crumble away after the First World War. But in the period from the early 1870s through to the beginning of the First World War, these two architects built, I suppose, around about 50 theatres throughout the empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all over the place. So they were always kept busy, and they were building something like a new theatre each year. Of course, they had a lot of not just scenery, but particularly things like theatre curtains, theatre murals, lots of painted work for artists to do. And so between 1882 and 86, the Künstler Company were working very, very hard, very rarely at home, all over that part of Europe, decorating theatres. Towards the end of this period, they got a little bit of a break. It wasn't that they were starving, they were doing very well, but they benefited from the death of one of the important painters of the day. The greatest of all the historicists in the 1880s was a man called Hans Mackart, and he sadly died in 1884, leaving many commissions unfulfilled. And one of these was a commission for the architect Karl Hasenauer, who was designing for the Hermes Villa. And the Hermes Villa near Vienna was a shooting lodge or hunting lodge that the emperor had given to the empress, to Elizabeth, to retire from the court, as it were. She didn't like court life. She liked to be by herself. She liked the freedom that being away from the court gave her. And so he said, well, I'll give you the Hermes Villa and you can go and spend time there. That had to be decorated. Hasenauer asked, as you might imagine, the Künstler Company if they would finish off work that had already been started by Mackart. So they ended up painting ceiling and wall frescoes for the Hermes Villa. And they were very successful at it. So successful that Hasenauer, at the end of the successful completion of the work there, said, well, look, I've just finished, or I'm just finishing a couple of really big buildings on the ring. And I wonder if you'd like to do something for those two buildings. And of course, they were only too pleased. The first of these theatres was the Berg Theatre in Vienna. And here we can see a picture. That's red and white tram car that you see in the middle of the screen. It's in fact running along the ring outside of the Berg Theatre. And what an imposing building it was. And it had just been completed at this time. What he asked them to do was to decorate the two staircases in the Berg Theatre. This is one of them. And what he wanted them to do was to decorate the ceilings with a series of murals. And as you can see, they are quite magnificent, these staircases. It took them a little bit over 2 years, I think, to do, but they shared the work, of course, and managed to get this magnificent decorative scheme finished, as it were, on time. One of the reasons that Hasenauer and, of course, Helmer and Fellner had originally employed the three young men was the fact they were all trained to paint in exactly the same way. And it was difficult, certainly up to about this point, and I suppose here as well, it was very difficult to tell who was painting what. We know that a lot of the figures were painted by Franz Matsch and by Klimt himself, whilst a lot of the landscapes, the background details were provided for by Ernst, the younger brother, but he also did some figure work as well. And it was almost impossible to tell which one had done it. In fact, when they put in for a series of designs for a project, they come up with 3 sets of designs. Each one of the 3 would provide original, you know, the primary designs. They would then send them off, and they'd say to the clients, well, if you want us, you can pick and choose. You don't have to pick all the Klimts or all the Matches. You can do some of one and some of the other. And then when the choice was made, the lads would toss a coin or pick a card or what have you, just to choose who should do what. So Franz Matsch might end up painting a design by Gustav Klimt or by Ernst, and vice versa. So they were that good, and they were that samey, I suppose. And I don't say that with any disrespect. Now, we're going to have a look at them, but I draw your attention to these main pages. This one here, and we're going to have a look at this in a minute. And not this one, but there were, as you can see here and here, there were several, I think it's 4 on each ceiling, of these lobed, elongated, rectangular panels. And we're going to have a look at one of those as well. So this is the one we're going to start looking at. And I'm a bit of a stiff neck here. It's a bit hard to actually see what's going on up there. And we can't see all of it. So let's just have a look in a bit more detail, shall we? So there it comes down off the ceiling. And we can see the sort of thing they were painting. The brief was to paint ceiling decorations that showed the history of theatrical productions. And so this is one that was knocked up by Gustav Klimt. You may not be able to see it, but right down the bottom here, if my cursor is working, but the bottom right of the panel, you can see the name Gustav Klimt if you're near enough to your screen. This is the theatre at Taormina in the Mediterranean, of course. And it's an ancient sort of Greco-Roman style setting. They did Greek work, they did Roman work, they did all sorts of work. They were very accomplished. They captured the essence, as the Victorians saw it, of the period. And you can see in a picture like this, I suppose the influence of French academic art with the nude in the foreground and the other nude who's playing the sort of twin flutes, and looking at all those wonderful victories in the background, the winged victories with their laurel wreaths, golden laurel wreaths, and this wonderful Mediterranean setting. This is the sort of thing that French academic art was about. It was about what painters such as Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema was like in England. He painted marble so well that people often describe his work as being marvellous. But he painted things in England very like that which you're seeing here. It's essentially very naturalistic, almost photographic artwork. And it really is quite something. So that is a theatre at Taormina. Let's just have another look. How did they produce these works? Well, of course, they did rough sketches, and they worked those rough sketches up into very finely detailed drawings, which were then transferred to the ceilings. that had to be painted, and they did these things life size apparently, and quite often. We can see how accurately the drawings, the initial drawings, were reproduced on the painted ceilings. If we just look at this particular image here, you can see there a young lady, and nearby, with his head turned to one side, incidentally, that was brother Georg Klimt, or Georg Klimt, was modelling for this. We can see these two, and you probably will be under, or having no problem in thinking, oh, I bet that's Romeo and Juliet, and you'd be right. Follow it through, and let's just have a look and see just how well it came out. As you can see, absolutely spot on. And this is no longer the Theatre of Taormina. This is, of course, the Globe. This is another one of these drawings by Gustav Klimt. This time, you can probably see quite clearly just where the roundel finishes at the bottom. There's a little panel with a sword, man with a sword and a ruff. You can see there, G. Klimt, Gustav Klimt. But that really is quite something. If you like to look to the other side of the screen, whilst people are watching from the Globe Theatre at this amazingly sad, tragic scene, we can see it's holding the attention of three young men towards the back of the audience, one dressed in a red jacket, one with a ruff around his neck, and one with a rather black cylindrical hat. The drawings for this particular group still exist as well. We can see them there, and we can literally fit them over. They're so accurate, and these, I'll blow them up, show things, or this picture shows things in much more detail. And it's quite phenomenal. It's a piece by Klimt, and it's also probably, I think, the only self-portrait of Klimt as well. The man at the back with the ruff round his neck, that large white lace ruff, is Gustav Klimt. Behind him, wearing the red jacket, is Ernst Klimt, and the lad in the foreground with a little beard and a moustache and the conical black hat is, of course, Franz Mach. This is typical commercial art of the period. Today, people will look at this and think this is great art, and indeed, technically, it is great art. It doesn't exactly stretch the mind very much. This is commercial art, whatever we think of it. But this is how they made their way in life. This is how they earned their living. Once that was finished, they, I suppose, looked at each other quite happily. They'd been congratulated by all and sundry, including, I think, the Emperor, and been awarded various things. They probably looked around and thought, this is all very good, but what do we do next? And Hasenau then said, well, I've just completed the Kunsthistorisches Museum, one of two museums. From where I took this photograph, I'm standing in front or behind me. You know, if the person with the umbrella is in front of me, behind me is another building which is identical to this one. There are two museums on the site, but this one, the one you're looking at, is the Kunsthistorische Museum. I've actually stayed in their guest room, this building. It's quite a tale to tell, but it was good fun, I must admit, when I did it. As a much younger person, a very luxurious bedroom they provided me with for very little money, I must say. Anyway, long time ago. Anyway, Hasenau said this is a problem, this particular building, because it was started off by Hans Mackart. He's done some of it. The actual ceiling paintings are being done by somebody else. There was one of the royals, one of the aristocracy, young woman, I think, had rather admired a painter. She liked him perhaps a little bit too much, and had made sure that he got the job of doing the ceiling painting. But he said that still leaves an awful lot of other work to do. I'd like you to paint the staircase. Well, they looked at it. We're not seeing the ceiling painting that was painted by someone else, whose name I can't remember. But what we are seeing is all the way along above the arches, we're seeing these half circles, these lunettes, as they're called. They'd already been painted, finished by Hans Mackart. So what was there left to do? What was left to do was the paintings here to either side of the arch. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. But these areas here to the side of the arch, triangular area, see a naked lady on the centre one, that's area of wall is known as the spandrel. It's the area to the top and side of the arch, at the top of the arch. So we've got several spandrels to paint, and we've also got areas between the columns. You may see me with the cursor at the moment. We've got these little areas in between the columns, the inter-column areas. They also need painting. And they worked it out, all in all, there were 40 paintings to be done. So they looked at the problem. The brief here was to trace literally the history of art in pictures from the original art that came out of the Egyptians right the way through to just about the modern day. So they were to do this, and they were to do it by looking at the various objets d'art, paintings and other objects in the Fine Art Museum itself. So they were to use some of the collection to actually help them with the designs for these paintings. It may not seem a lot, but when we look closely, we'll see the work that was involved. And these spandrels and intercolumn pictures have become a great deal more famous than the work done on the ceiling or by Mackart himself. So let's just have another look at this. Here they are, absolutely glowing. On 2 occasions in the last few years, they've built this walkway, various celebrations, I think a little bit of restoration work, etc. They've built this causeway along only temporarily for people to go and really get a close look at these marvellous pictures, and you can see the spotlights on them. Now, I'm going to have a look at a couple of them. As you are looking at the screen, I'm going to look at the lady whose head you can just see between the set of columns to the left of her, and I'm going to look at the naked lady being photographed by a gentleman in a blue shirt. Wasn't me, I may hasten to add. So here's a close-up. You can see on the very left-hand side of your picture, we just got clipped by the edge of the screen. We've got the lady I'm going to really look at. And then we have on the right-hand side of the arch, of the spandrel there, we have an ancient Egyptian. Let's just have a look at them in a little bit more detail. So see where they are, and there she is. This is what she looks like. You can see quite clearly, even though this is just a small area between 2 columns, that an awful lot of work has gone into this picture. This is the early career of Gustav Klimt, and you can see there it looks like CK, but it's really GK for Gustav Klimt. And there we have a young lady, and the piece of the collection that is most noticeable is the bit of black figure pottery behind her. It's an ancient Greek pottery, a great urn that they've discovered in the collection, and Klimt covered it here. Incidentally, they divided up the work, I suppose relatively arbitrarily. There were 40 images to be created, as I've said. The Klimt brothers did 13 each, and Franz Matsch did 14 of them. Quite a lot of work. Also, I think probably the little bronze statuette was in the museum as well. Now, the young lady, a young Greek girl, soon became nicknamed from a fashion of the period. Just a few years earlier, in Greece, people started excavating a burial site, a town called Tanagra, and the graves were fantastic. They were full of little terracotta figurines, particularly of females, usually no more than a few inches, I think at the most about 9 or 10 inches high. And these Tanagra figurines were eagerly, some of them were sold off, were eagerly collected across Europe. There are lots of fakes. Most museums have their share of fakes in their collection, but there are a lot of genuine ones as well. And this young lady immediately was given the nickname the girl from Tanagra. Now, she may look as if she's dressed in ancient Greek dress, but she really isn't. She's dressed in the sort of style that women were starting to wear from about the 1870s onwards, the dress reform movement, where they threw away their corsets. It was a bit like the burn your bra movement of the 20th century. They threw away their corsets and had a much freer clothing. And as you can see, there's plenty of cloth there. She's not constricted. She has a sort of waistband. But that, and I think the pattern as well, probably on the dress, marked it out as being a very contemporary to us, as it were, or to the Klimts at the time, rather than being ancient Greek. If you look at her hairstyle, and particularly her face, she really could be the girl in the cake shop or in the theatre, or your next door neighbour's daughter. She's very much a late 19th century woman. And people started to notice this. This is the first time that we can see Klimt actually sort of pushing against the regulations, as it were. If we look at the other one, I won't say much about this, but you can see here what a wonderful sense of proportion Klimt has, and the way he deals with skin. It's so marked. You almost feel that if you touch this figure, she'd be. I don't know who's just coughed. Well, I did, but somebody's still got their microphone on if they can actually turn it on. So here is this wonderful figure. And again, she has much more of a modern face than she does an ancient Egyptian one. So this is just a wonderful place to visit. If you go to the Kunsthistorische, lots of wonderful paintings, but look at the wall decorations as well. Now, the contract for this came in February 1890. It was completed, ready for the opening in October 1891. So it just over a year to do all this painting. It really was quite a feat. When the museum opened, it looked as if things were all going to be plain sailing forever. This group of 3 young men were the talk of the town. Everybody loved that, or everybody that counted loved what they had done. This wonderful, as I say, almost super realist style. You could almost talk to the figures on the walls. The emperor was over the moon, as it were, about it. The papers, Viennese newspapers, they seemed to give good reviews, etc. And in the same year, the Society of Viennese Artists, the main artist body in Vienna, indeed in Austria, admitted them into the society. Everything looked fantastic. Not only that, but, and here we have another one of the spandrels, this time showing us a scene from the German Renaissance. This is another bit of art history. This is a painting by Ernst Klimt of his fiancée, who he also married in October of 1891. Everything was absolutely fantastic. This was Helena Flöger, and she was very beautiful, and they were married. Within a very short amount of time, she found herself pregnant, and the world was opening up. Everything was fine. And then disaster struck. In July of that year, the Klimt's father died. That was bad enough, but then in December, perhaps an even worse thing took place. Young Ernst, still only I think 28 at the time, young Ernst developed flu, and there were a lot of flu epidemics at the time. A big flu epidemic in 1918, which over the course of 2 or 3 years, a bit like our present plague, killed, I'm told by some authorities, 50 million people, and we haven't quite got it that bad yet. But anyway, he got this flu, and in December of 1892, he died, leaving Helena with a very, very young child, the guardianship of which was taken over by Gustav Klimt, the older brother. And everything seemed to spiral downwards from that time for particularly the family. It was really personal tragedies. It also marked really the end of the firm that was the Kunstlers, the company of Kunstlers workers. The three men had got on very well together, but now Franz Masch had fallen in with an actress. Gustav wanted to go his own way, and so things were going to change. They were all three of them members of the Society of Viennese Artists, and so they were able to indulge themselves in learning a lot more about the artwork, Franz Masch and Gustav Klimt. The society had this very good exhibition gallery known as the Kunstlerhaus in their headquarters, and we can see here one of their exhibitions in Vienna in 1888. It's a typical Victorian hang, but worse than that, this very traditional hang. If you look at some of those paintings, they really are looking quite dated compared to what was going on in the rest of Europe. Klimt didn't actually do much with the society for a year or two, but by the middle of the 1890s, he was starting to get a bit tired of the society itself. It wasn't avant-garde. Why weren't they getting art in from, say, the Impressionists or some of the new symbolist artists? Why weren't they casting their net when they were having exhibitions further than just artists in Austria? They seem to only ever want the same old paintings, same styles, the same subject matter. So Klimt decided that something must be done about it, and so did a lot of the young artists. They tried to get on to all the committees, they sometimes did, that decided upon policy, but they never could get enough of these young people onto the committee, these young rebels, as it were. They just couldn't get enough of them onto the committees to take control. And eventually, when a new president was elected, who was very, very conservative and who put equally conservative people into the chair position on all these committees, these young tigers, as it were, had enough. And they founded their own association. They founded not the society, but the Association of Visual Austrian Artists. And when they did so, they warned basically the society that something had to change. They sent a letter saying they were quite happy to be members, but something had to change. They got no real response, and so in 1897, I think it was in May, 19 of the artists 19 with Klimt, 19 of these young artists decided that there was time for a change, and they decided to secede, to leave the Society of Viennese Artists, and this was the Vienna Secession, a name which means that they seceded from something, they left something. There was, for example, a Berlin secession, a Munich secession. Today we think of secession in terms of Art Nouveau architecture, Art Nouveau design in Vienna at this time, but in fact it started off with the painting. Most of them were fairly young, though the oldest member of the secession at that time when they left was, I think, 83, and he decided that he agreed with them. Klimt himself was not a young man. He was in his mid-30s, and one of the real, I suppose, catches was this man, Otto Wagner, the greatest architect in Vienna at that time, and he was even older. He had a very, very successful career, and one might think that he was risking all, but it was worth it to change the face of art in Vienna. So there we are. Joseph Maria Ulbrich was the assistant to Otto Wagner. Joseph Hoffmann, Coleman Moser, both of them designers, Gustav Klimt an artist, and they set out to change the world. The first thing they had to do was to have a building to show their art. This is it. It's still there to this day. Had a lot of trouble getting permission to build it, and they were told they could only have the site and the building for 10 years, but that was about 120 years ago now. So it's a long lease, as it were. And here we have the secession building. It is really quite wonderful. On top is well, it's known as the golden cabbage to the locals, but in fact it's a laurel tree. So it's the leaves that the victor has for the wreath. That if you, in the ancient world, you get the laurel wreath to put on your head if you were the victor at the Olympics or something like that. It has this central section and two wings. It's very similar to the sort of format that Otto Wagner was building the Vienna underground stations in. If you've been there, around about 1900, the Wiener Stadtbahn, the underground railway, was being put in, and a lot of the stations look a little bit like this, not with a golden cabbage, but with the two wings and the entrance in the middle. Otto Wagner and Ulbrich both had a history, as it were, in classical architecture. On the side of the building there, you can see the word Ver Sacrum. This is the sacred spring. It doesn't mean a water source particularly, though that as well, but it's really about the renewal of art. It's this revolution in art, and Ver Sacrum, it's all about spring, the season, spring, and the renewal that it brings each year. And that's exactly what the artists who were in the secession wanted. Along the front, you've got there some trees of life, and you have these three heads. These very, very ancient classical ideas here. Malerai architecture and plastic. The fine arts, it's the same in England, are made up of those three areas, and each head represents one of them. Malerai is painting, architecture speaks for itself, and plastic is sculpture. So if you didn't know that architects were fine artists, they really are. Above the doorway was the motto, as it were, this idea, Kunst. To every age it's art, to art it's freedom. And it's been there ever since the building was built, apart from the period when the Nazis ran the country. And they, of course, decided that that wasn't good for them, and they took it down. Before the building was made, and they only succeeded in 1897, and it was ready for the second exhibition of the secession by November of the following year. So it only took about a year and a bit to get the planning through and get it built. They needed this new association needed to make some money, so they decided they'd have an exhibition. The old Art Society of Vienna decided to block every proposition they made to every reasonable gallery owner in the country. Well, in the city of Vienna, they went around and said, oh, you can't do this, you get into awful trouble, we don't want that. But eventually, and it literally was like two people running a race, the secessionists managed to get to the Horticultural Society first. And so the first art exhibition that was put on by the secession was in the Royal Horticultural Hall, and very successful it was. This is Gustav Klimt's design for the poster, the first secession exhibition of early 1898. And as you can see, there we have the goddess Athena and she is the patron of the secession as well as the city of Vienna and art in general. At the top, you can see Theseus slaying the Minotaur. I'm sure you're familiar with the story. And basically what Theseus is doing is slaying the old to bring in the new, and it's in artistic terms. It's one of the few times in his life that Klimt was actually censored, because the censors would not allow this particular poster, and they made him change it. So he had to put in a couple of stylized trees to hide Theseus's manhood. But there we go. It was just one of those things, and I'm sure they didn't mind too much. Well, it was, well, I expect Klimt was furious, but by the by. Anyway, it was very successful, and they made a lot of money, not enough to do the building, but Klimt had a few friends, and one of them in particular advanced a very large sum of money, Wittgenstein it was, and he gave the money, and the building was built. And so they could start bringing in foreign artists, foreign works for their exhibitions. Works by, for example, the Swiss artist, friend of Gustav Klimt, Ferdinand Hodler, who was a symbolist artist, and we won't go into that yet, but the symbolist artist, and so Ferdinand Hodler, his works could be looked at. Or the Belgian symbolist, Ferdinand Knopf. These two were just two names on the list of people that they wanted to have in their exhibitions, to show Vienna that art was not all just like the pictures they painted in those buildings. They wanted to do something new, something revolutionary. And of course, it wasn't just for paintings. They wanted the secession to be involved in design, in the decorative arts, or the applied arts. For the 8th exhibition in November, December 1900, they invited for that exhibition several English artists and designers. They invited Charles Robb Ashby, who went and showed there. But I suppose from the British point of view, the real attraction of it was that the Glasgow Four were represented by the works of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, his wife Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh, her sister Frances MacDonald, and her husband as well. Unfortunately, Frances and her husband couldn't go because they were having a child which they ended up calling Sylvan. Not a personal favourite of mine, that name, but there we are. Poor child. But when Margaret and Charles arrived in Vienna, they'd sent all their exhibition. You can see it, the mirror, the mural done by Margaret on the there. There's a chair by Mackintosh, one that I'm sure you're familiar with. When they arrived, they were met at the station by art students who put them on a flower-bedecked cart and pulled them around the city of Vienna. It must have been really quite wonderful. If only Mackintosh had taken the invitation to go and work in Vienna, he might have done better than he actually did, because by 1913 his career was basically over in Scotland. If you look to the right-hand side, you'll see a rather strange, to the right of that Mackintosh chair, you'll see a rather strange item. It's also another part of their oeuvre. It's textiles, and they still exist. There's one to either side of it. Well, there you go. The building, as you can see, must have looked absolutely crazy in the middle of Vienna. You can see there the buildings at the back. That's typical of this period. But this building was absolutely unique in the Viennese experience. It wasn't unique in Europe. We're talking about 1900. And so we have got, for example, this in Brussels. This is where it all started. In the middle of the 1890s, this was the Hotel Tassel, built in Rue Janssen in Brussels, designed by Victor Horta, the man who really started Art Nouveau architecture in the world. And of course, it was a time when Art Nouveau was sweeping through Europe. Mackintosh is Art Nouveau. He's not really arts and crafts, he's Art Nouveau. Lots of magazines How did the Viennese know about Charles Rennie Mackintosh? Well, of course, people came to Britain, they visited and met Mackintosh, but also they probably first saw his works in the new magazine, the Studio magazine, which started publishing in 1893. They were one of the few English magazines that actually liked the Glasgow Four's work, that liked Art Nouveau. Most of the journals of the day considered it to be something immoral and actually far too French. The Germans, they produced magazines and Art Nouveau. This is Jugend, and of course there also are magazines produced by the French, the Spanish, the Italians. In Vienna, of course, here we are in the Lingowiensäule, we can see this wonderful Art Nouveau building by Otto Wagner. This doesn't look particularly classical. It really is, but its decoration was far from classical. You can see it, we'll see close up in a moment. This is one of the new underground railway stations that he built. This is a very unique one. There's a pair of them, they face each other across a sort of little square. This is the one at Karlsplatz. Most of them don't have quite such a high sort of domed appearance, but they're all painted white and green. This one has wonderful sunflowers. This is art coming into industrial design. There's another building here decorated by Wagner. You can see this wonderful gold decoration. This is the building again. It's called the Majolica House. These are all tiles, and you can see, like all things Art Nouveau, there are very few straight lines because it's based on nature. That is the outside of the Majolica House. If we go into this building, we can see equally well an Art Nouveau lift. Is that not glorious? Vienna did have a revolution. Most people, I suppose, didn't notice it, but certainly enough did, and art prospered. Anyway, back to Klimt. Now, it's not often you get to see the development of an artist from one style to another, to another, to another, but you do with Klimt. And so I'm going to go through a number of pictures fairly quickly because they don't need that much analysis. But in 1894, in this portrait of Margaret Brüning, you can see here Klimt, lady in the black dress. You can see quite clearly this is painted in that old historicist traditional style. Very, very tight, very finely finished, finely detailed work on this. Looking at that wall behind it, she could almost be in a Vermeer, even though Vermeer is obviously a lot earlier. But then 4 years later, we've got this picture of Sonia Knips. And this is very, very different. There's no crazed and crackled wall, which might be partially to the paint on the picture, but it certainly looks as if it could be otherwise. But even if it is that white wall, even if it is the paint that's cracking rather than painted that way, you know, it's a wall. It's a proper wall with a proper decoration hanging on it. But if we look at Sonia, we can see that she, particularly her face and the vase of flowers, they're the only really finely worked, detailed elements of this picture. Her dress, even her hands are not particularly detailed. The background doesn't exist. There looks to be something like a horse in the background, if I'm seeing it correctly. But it's very influenced by people like James Abbott McNeill Whistler. You look at a lot of Whistler portraits, and the people float in a grey or dusty or even an ochre cloud with no detail. People often suggest that this looks a little impressionistic as well, and so it does. It looks as if it's formed of a lot of streaky strokes. Klimt was great at this sort of misty, mysterious way of doing things. So yes, perhaps there is some impressionism in there as well. This is Sonia, the Baroness Poitiers d'Echelle. She married a chap called Anton Kipps, a great industrialist. They didn't get on particularly well. They quite liked art, I think, the pair of them. But she soon moved out, got her own apartment, and proceeded to decorate it, particularly when the Wiener Werkstätte started in 1903, which was the Viennese workshops run by Hoffmann and Moser. when they started working there, she had her furniture made by the Wiener Werkstätte, and she had, you know, a number of Klimt pictures. You can see on the wall, there she is, an actual photograph of her wearing a sort of secession style dress. And on the wall is the picture that you are seeing in colour on the right. It's this fruit trees. So she was a patron of Klimt, and very important for both Klimt and his other designer friends, as it were. From the same period is this portrait of Klimt's young niece. This is Ernst's daughter, Helena, and she's now grown up a little bit. She's still quite small, only about six, 7, something like that. But we can see here, he's painting the face, the hair, very detailed fashion. But again, the background's sketchily painted. And if you look at the actual dress she's wearing, that looks very impressionistic, particularly when you look at the way it is painted in regard as the shadows. The shadows aren't really black, they're a bluey grey colour, typical of the Impressionists. And, you know, you can see this sort of same brushwork in work, for example, even by Monet. We look at this one, 1875, much earlier, but you know, the Viennese were not seeing painters like this until the secession started to bring them to Vienna. When they did, perhaps Klimt was affected. But if you look at this and we look at a slice across her sleeve, as it were, we can see a similar sort of way of painting. It's more in pastel, more paint on there. But look at these shadows and the way the folds go through it. It's not that different. So Klimt's already, by 1898, changing his style to match the European style, as it were, that's coming through. Again, this portrait of Hermine Gallia, wonderful portrait, but again, you can see there a little bit floaty, the dress. It's probably a secession style dress created possibly by the Floeg sisters, who we will talk about more in a moment. But you can see there the way on the sleeves particularly, and in certain other areas, the way white is used to heighten details. But the rest of it's rather mysterious and fuzzy. Face, hair, hands, well worked, but not so much anything else. And although you can see what appears to be, well, is it a carpet or is it a carpet of flowers on the floor? As well as that, you can see, or you can't see really, the wall. It's just a fuzzy grey mass. And this is what was taking place. This was the style across Europe at the time. Not everybody was painting like this, but people like Whistler were, and many of the other sort of symbolists. It adds mystery to the paintings, and it brings the actual sitter, the image itself, out of the painting towards you. This is the Gallia family. Just a word or two about Klimt's clientele. The lady sitting down in the front row, as it were, that's the model for the picture you've just seen. A very large family. This is the Gallia family. The Gallia family were of Jewish descent, and many of Klimt's clients were. There were obviously Jewish communities all over Europe, but there was quite a large Viennese Jewish community. Franz Joseph enfranchised the Jewish community. Most places they had very little power, very little political influence. They did find themselves quite successful at making money. Many of them were quite wealthy. But under Franz Joseph, they actually got some sort of political power as well. They were able to, to use their position to, I suppose, advantage themselves in the community just as much as anybody else was able to do, which they hadn't been able to do before. So they'd spent a lot of time, as it were, working very, very hard and doing well for themselves, but they couldn't ever change the system until the emperor changed things. They could even take up government positions, I believe, as well. They were very much, the Jewish community, very much supporters of the Vienna art scene, and in particular Gustav Klimt. And without them, there would have been, I think, nothing of the collection we have. We may have seen some good paintings by Klimt, but not very many. He wouldn't have had the success had it not been for the Jewish community, who not only bought many of his works of art, but also patronized the Wiener Secession, the Wiener workshops of Hoffmann and Moser, and also the Floge sisters, who made their clothes for them. If you go to, and I think this is in Melbourne that I found this, you can see there the Gallia family, they also had Wiener Werkstätte furniture, and they have survived in Australia. Now, Emily Floger, never known quite how it's pronounced, but different people pronounce it in different ways. This is a portrait that he did of Emily. This is Klimt, did a portrait in 1902. Now, it was considered by many people to just be a sort of strange pattern work that Klimt had done, very unusual, but he just patterned it in the same way he patterned so many other things around about this time. But in fact, that isn't the case. This is actually a dress. Klimt may have designed the fabric, but it's probably a fabric that was designed either by him or perhaps by Hoffmann or Moser. It's a dress that was probably designed and made by Emily herself. She was one of several sisters who ran a, well, it's more than a dress shop, I would say. It was one of the leading dress shops, couturiers, if you like, in Vienna at the time. They'd started off literally with a small shop where they stitched their own dresses and made a few items, but they eventually were able to progress to a very large shop in the middle of Vienna, and their workshops, I think, were employing about 80 people at one period. They were making so many clothes. Very expensive, very exclusive, so much so that Emily travelled to London and Paris each year to, she did a trip, I think, to London, a trip to Paris each year to see what was going on in the high fashion of those centres. So it was a fashion house rather than anything else. And so she was all part of the equation as to what was going on in Klimt's life and the artistic community. He met her because she was his sister-in-law. She was Helena Ernst, the dead brother's Ernst's wife. It was her sister. And so he met her at the same sort of period, 1891, when this portrait was painted, when Emily was only 17 years old. She was very beautiful, very young and vivacious, and had quite a will of her own. And she became the most important person in Klimt's life, right from 1891 to when he died in 1918. We still to this day don't know whether they were having a physical relationship or whether it was purely platonic, but they were always together, and they went on holiday together. But we don't know. There's nothing left to tell us other than the fact that they were friends. And we're pretty certain that they were very good friends, but she burnt, when he died, she burnt a lot of the letters that he'd sent her. She did leave a group of about 400 postcards from Klimt to her, and they're all quite mundane, nothing other than, you know, merry thoughts, nothing very intimate. So we really don't know. And that's about all we can say. But they were lifelong, as it were, partners, one way or the other. And she and her sisters designed what to many people today would look to be quite horrific clothes. But this was the time of Art Nouveau, fancy clothes. Most of their clientele was from the Jewish community. And in fact, their shop in the centre of Vienna prospered for several decades. It was only in the 30s when the Nazis came in and literally destroyed the Jewish community in Vienna that they had to shut up shop. They were very successful. You can see here Emily modelling. She's about 12 years younger than Klimt, I think it is. And you can see her modelling the clothes. He painted this and kept it for a number of years, but he sold it in the end, as artists sometimes want to do. But look how detailed her face, her hands are, and even the patterning, but the background, really not at all. Here we have some more. The triangles, the stripes, and squares, very much the sort of secessionist style. The Wiener Werkstätter loved triangles, they loved squares, and the ladies loved those chokers, big square brooches that went on a ribbon around their neck. And look at this. So these were the clothes that they were selling to the ladies who were painted by Klimt. Whether Klimt sent the ladies to the shop or the shop sent the ladies to Klimt, it was obviously a very mutual thing, and it seemed to work for both of them. For example, all of these three ladies, I imagine, are wearing Flöger dresses. We have already seen the Gallia portrait of 1904. The one next, which is interesting, I don't know that one very well, but this one of Gertrude Loewe, or Loewe, that was 1902, 2 years earlier than the Gallia one, sold in Sotheby's 2015 for almost £25 million. How about that? And then we have 1905, so we've got the early one in the middle, then slightly later again. We've got the Margaret Stonborough Wittgenstein, or Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, or Pa Wittgenstein, was the man who basically paid for the secession building. And here you can see the styles have changed again. Still wearing these sort of wonderful ball gowns, but look at the background. This now is what Klimt is up to by 1905. Very rectilinear, series of squares, oblongs in the background. And you can see there's a carpet, you can see there's a skirting board, black and white checkerboard on it. Klimt's name is in bottom left-hand corner. And you can still see that the most attention goes to the head and hands, but we are seeing quite a lot of attention to detail in the background as well here. So he's developing, his style is maturing. It started really, you know, as early as the mid 1890s. But it wasn't just his style of painting that was changing, it was the way that he thought about content. This is a picture in 1895. Now think about the pictures you've seen, the girl from Tanagra, there she is with the Greek vase and everything's as it should be. But here in this picture of love, we have the young man, the beautiful young lady, and they are in love and they are about to kiss, I expect. And that's wonderful and beautiful. But look at the top of the picture, and what do we see? Nothing lasts forever. It's not always happy. There is the child, there is the young woman, but look on the left-hand side, is there insanity? Is there jealousy? Is there envy? And Klimt started to think about the symbolic power of the picture. This was he lived in the Vienna of Freud, and Freud was talking about, for example, the meaning of life and sexuality and how important that was and what happened in your dreams. And that's what's going on here, really. He was very well aware of what Freud was up to, and he started to look at the content of his pictures. He got a, I must hurry along a little bit, I think we're a bit late starting, but he got this wonderful commission to try and decorate the main hall of the new university. There were three paintings, philosophy on the left, medicine and jurisprudence on the right. And when he put them, he painted them, and they didn't like them at the university. They had an arts commission and they said, no way. Philosophy, that was bad enough. What on earth does it show? Is this any way to show the dignity of this mystic science? And what about this? Medicine. Surely that's no way to show medicine. There's skulls of people suffering. There's the woman who looks to be pregnant and showing far too much to the rest of the world. The commission hated it. Most of the critics hated it. It was considered to be absolutely beyond the pale. And Klimt could hardly believe what was going on. All three of them, unfortunately, we only have black and white photographs because they were destroyed by the Nazis at the end of the war. But we do have this study for medicine to show the sort of colour scheme, and you can see it's rather depressing. And the doctors wanted medicine to be shown as something that would make people better, would enlighten their life. But this doesn't look like that to them. Even with the lady at the bottom, the goddess Hygeia, who's going to make everybody healthy, it still didn't present what they wanted to. One of the works, Philosophy, was sent off to the Paris Universal Exhibition in 1900, where it won the Grand Prix. Klimt will have thought that was fine. Made no odds. They still hated it in Vienna. It's there on the right-hand side, hanging up. So he painted this picture. He wanted to paint it as basically, it's, if you don't mind me saying, it's one of those sort of kiss my ass pictures. It was going to be entitled To My Critics, but his friend said, no, just call it Goldfish, it's much better. But you can see there his response to all this criticism in the Viennese art world. He didn't like it. There are all those naughty ladies with their red hair. Red hair, incidentally, always the naughty colour for hair. It's the colour of the devil. Back here at the HQ, I suppose, the 14th Secession Exhibition, 1902, commemorated Beethoven. It wasn't supposed to be a lot of individual works. It was supposed to be the whole building full of works that related to Beethoven. And this wonderful statue by Max Klinger, I'll show you a coloured version in a moment. What it was really commemorating was not just Beethoven, but Beethoven's Fifth and the final chorus, the Schiller's Ode to Joy. This is what it was all about. Out of art, and music is an art, out of art comes peace and happiness. Lots of other bits, because I won't bother you with those, but here is Max Klinger's wonderful statue. This didn't sell. I'm surprised, it should have done, but it's now in the museum in Leipzig. This is Klimt's. Everybody else got a wall. Klimt got a hole in. If you look on the right there, I think it is, you could actually see there's a hole in the wall, several holes in the wall, where you can see the statue of Beethoven in the middle. This is Klimt's frieze that ran around the top of 3 sides of this room. It's all about attaining happiness. You can see there the miserable suffering humanity. They want happiness. They ask the knight, and the two young ladies, one of them with the wreath is about ambition. She will win. She wants the knight to win. That's one of his facets. He must win. But the other young lady is about compassion. He's listening to what he must do to save humanity from the state that they are in. Running along the top of the frieze, we can see on this, that's one of the drawings, original drawings, we can see these sort of like angel figures flying along the top. And they are humanity rushing forward through the picture and along the walls. Quite wonderful. On the shortest of the walls, he encounters the evil powers. The great gorilla-looking figure, Typhus, has 3 daughters, the Gorgons, and above you can see the figure of death. Then further to the middle, we can see the figure of gluttony. And then there's a rather seductive party girl and the young lady who obviously is content just having experienced, well, let's not even think about what she might have been experiencing. A little bit further along is nagging doubt. And the knight has to fight his way through all these terrible things. But eventually, there they are. I love the red-haired naughty one there. But finally, he gets the final wall, And here we find on the left-hand side these figures. They are art. They are what art can do for you. Art is the solution, and they push the night forward. There is a choir singing this sort of joy to all and happiness, and the night finally gets to meet happiness. They kiss. It's a kiss for the whole world, and it's why now that Schiller's Ode to Joy is the anthem of the United Nations. It's really one of the first times that he's using a lot of gold. And you can see here that he starts to use more and more gold. You can see all around the bottom there a lot of gold. Strange figures. Where do the figures come from? They're supposed to be serpents or snakes. But the female, obviously, loved women, did Klimt. They're probably taken from a whole range of influences, such as Jan Turop, the Dutch artist. These are some of his figures. He will have known Margaret and Francis MacDonald, the Macintosh Margaret. The Glasgow Four were not called the Spook School for nothing by the English press. The Macintosh girls or the MacDonald girls also created figures like this. So that's probably where Klimt is looking. Here we can see Gustav Klimt's Judith I, where gold is used. The model for this is probably Adele Bloch-Bauer, and both of these, first and second. Klimt, 1903, he was in Italy. He went into St. Mark's and saw the gold inside, the gold mosaics. He went to Ravenna, to San Vitale, and saw these wonderful 6th century Byzantine mosaics, particularly taken with the Empress Theodora and the Emperor, not shown here, but the Emperor Theodosius. He loved this, these wonderful gold-backed mosaics, and presumably that affected what he was doing. And so we have this picture, and this is where the influences come from. It's pattern, it's gold, it's a mosaic, if you like. We can just about see to either side of her arms, there are the arms of a chair. She's sitting in a chair. Perhaps the panel behind is a pattern on the wall, or it's her collar. You can see in the bottom there, we have this wonderful skirting board, very, very much part of the Wiener Werkstatt rooms. Klimt was making pictures in a different way for a different reason than many artists. He was thinking of how they would look in a room, particularly a Wiener Werkstatt room. This is the Wiener Werkstatt exhibition, Mannheim 1907, and there she is. Another image that was shown at that same show was this one that you can see here. And that is designed by Hoffmann before the Wiener Werkstatt to frame all that setting, to frame Klimt's wonderful portrait of Maria Hinneberg, wife of a photographer. The house was designed by Hoffmann along with 3 others on the Hohewaard, a suburb of Vienna. That lamp fitting could easily be Macintosh. Here is on the Colman Moser, that's a poster on one side, but on the other side is another Klimt picture, very similar to the one we've seen before. It was designed for this Hoffmann interior, really. Which one came first, which came second, I don't know. But this is the shop. They eventually had a New York outlet. I think there was even in one in London. Started in 1903, closed in 1932. If you look at this portrait of this wealthy lady, Frieda Riedler, look down on the skirting board there. You can see this is one of his sort of mid-tens, as it were, pictures. If we look down there, and this particular mark on the skirting board, for me, it's one of those, most certainly. It's certainly influenced, as was the room decoration, by the Wiener Werkstatt. Anyway, the hairstyle is more down to the last words. Anyway, we're nearly at the end now. So this is 1908. This is the Kunstschau. And how far has Klimt come now? Well, This is the kiss, perhaps the most famous of all the Vienna pictures. Well, Adela Bauer, I don't know, but this is the most famous. It's on coffee cups, wallets, everything. And so he created the kiss, and it was shown at that particular show. This is the show where he also showed some of his landscapes. We forget that his landscapes formed, I think, over a quarter of his output over the years. So there we have one of them, and they're like these portraits you've seen, square format, very unusual. That one is Peasant Garden with sunflowers. He framed them by having a sheet of cardboard, a square cut out, and that's how he saw them. And here we can see Poppy Meadow, 1907. It's actually on the extreme left-hand side of this picture on the wall. As you just see the sky, but these raised skylines, it was typical of the influence of Japanese art, print art across Europe at this stage. And of course, if we look, this is Vincent van Gogh, late 1880s, and he's done the same thing. It's caused by looking down, a raised viewpoint. Klimt often painted from his bedroom window when he was on holiday, looked down on the scene. You've already seen this picture on the wall that's in colour. There she is, the Stonberg Wittgenstein picture. Look how she looks in reality. That's the photograph, very beautiful. And think how that picture looks absolutely nothing alike this one of Sonia in 1898. This is how he has changed. He's gone from being a very traditional genre painter to this new style, and then a giant leap forward into his golden period. And when it wasn't a portrait, it's something like this. The three ages of woman, really, the baby, the child, the mother, and in old age. And again, lots of pattern. And this is because, I'm sure, of the influence of mosaics. My favourite erotic picture, this one. This is Danae and the Shower of Gold, where Danae is looking as if she's quite enjoying being entered by Zeus as a shower of gold. Look up the story of Danae. It's all about, she's the mother of Perseus. After 1909, he stopped using gold and changed his style. He wrote to Hoffmann in a letter from Spain, get rid of the squares, triangles, all that sort of thing. From now on, it's all naturalism. It's all curving lines and nature. And so this is late Klimt. This is a portrait of Elizabeth Lederer. There she is. Now we're seeing her. The face is wonderful. The dress is, I think, an idea of the dress rather than anything else. She does stand on a carpet, but on the walls, we've got representations of Klimt's own Eastern Oriental art collection. So he's painted lots of Japanese or Chinese figures on the wall. Again, that was very, very typical at the time. So that's 1914, 1918. It's now all about colour. It's not about the geometrics anymore, it's about colour. The colour doesn't have to be detailed, it just has to be there. Only the figure counts. And it means the figure comes right out. She has a chair behind her. Is she sitting in it? Is that why the dress looks a bit strange? Hard to tell. I think not so much. It's now a symbolic dress. Her mother was painted by Klimt 15 years earlier or so, and that's when it's still this sort of wispy style. See how things have changed in 15 years. It's nice to look at her, as it were, before and after. This is nice. This is a very late one. This was in Klimt's studio and he died. Wasn't finished, but you can see here how Klimt worked. The hardest bits were done first, the face, the body, and then bits of decoration, and this is just roughly put in the background. Lots of pencil sketching going on, but as really just a rough guide, I suppose, not like those ones you saw right at the beginning of this talk. And that takes us back really to where we started with Adele Bloch-Bauer, but this one, her 1912 portrait. And this also sold for a phenomenal amount of money when the gold portrait and this one, and I think it was 4 landscape paintings, were restored to their owners because they were taken by the Nazis and the Austrian state. All these pictures were in the Belvedere in Vienna at one time, but they were returned to their rightful owners. It was decreed in 2005. So now some of them are in America, some are still, I think, in Europe. But this is Klimt in his last stage. Blocks of colour, patterns, nothing is tight, nothing's very finished, only the face, only the hands. And Klimt's hands are always very expressive. And I think that's probably about it. That's how an artist can change from the photographic to the very, very loose graphic. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.